Authorities are seeing a decline in the number of inmates at Dodds. For taxi operators to get a better chance at taking cruise ship passengers on tours. And in sports, the Barbados Pride steamrolls the Scorpions inside 3 days at Sabina Park.
Broadcasting from our studios in the Pine St. Michael, this is CBC Newsnight, starting now.
And a very good evening to you. I'm Lisa Laura. This is Newsnight, and in our top story, there has been a decline in the number of inmates at Her Majesty's Prison Dodds in recent times. And Home Affairs Minister Edmund Hinkson says that they're reaping some level of success with their various reformative programs. He was speaking during a retirement function for the Assistant Superintendent of Prisons, Cedric Moore, last evening.
After almost 46 years, Assistant Superintendent of Prisons Cedric Da Costa Moore is retiring from the Barbados Prison Service. And last evening, scores of friends, family and colleagues turned out to honor him. In his speech, Home Affairs Minister Edmund Hinkson revealed that the prison, which can house a maximum of 1,200 inmates, now usually houses between 760 and just over 800. Of this number, about 25 are women. Young men make up the majority. He says his ministry is looking at alternative sentencing for minor offences, and they're hoping to get the approval of Cabinet on the matter. Mr. Hinkson says the authorities need to see if it really makes sense to impose prison time for minor breaches of the law when other measures exist.
Ankle monitoring, for example, has to be an option. Do we continue as a state to send young people to prison where they then meet up with the hardened prisoners and are further entrenched in a lot of cases in their criminality and their criminal behavior and ways? Or do we look to offer them opportunities in life to reform outside of the prison service?
As it relates to juvenile justice, Mr. Hinkson says the numbers at the government industrial schools for both boys and girls are also on the decline.
A few months ago, when I became minister in May 2018, they numbered about 60. They're now, I think, roughly about 35 or so. And you know, the issue is about giving those who merit second chances in life. We all deserve second chances. But we know that the people of Barbados have to come on board with this.
Superintendent of Prisons, Lieutenant Colonel John Nurse, was full of praise for his second in command, who he called a dedicated civil servant who committed his life to transforming others.
Cedric loved his work. He would reminisce on how he sought to inspire others, to guide youngsters, and how he himself always found time to walk among the prisoners and offer advice and encouragement to junior staff. In fact, I cannot recall a prison activity or a parade in which the prison service participated and Cedric didn't somehow find himself present, even if he wasn't involved.
Mr. Moore, who would have looked after some of the island's most notorious criminals, thanked God, his family and the church, and left some words of advice for his colleagues.
One of the reasons that I can work at prison for 46 years is because I have a family to support me and a church to run to. I want to thank all of you. A friend in need is a friend indeed. And I want to ask all of you officers to be just that, to be a friend to each other, to be a friend and support, whether you are junior, whether you're senior.
Mr. Moore joined the prison service back in 1974.
An 87-year-old female visitor was killed after being involved in an accident with a 10-wheeler truck in the Bridgetown port this morning. Police Public Relations Officer Acting Inspector Rodney Innes says the accident occurred around 10 minutes to 11 in an area of the port known as the Breakwater. According to lawmen, the truck was driven by 35-year-old Anthony Omar Walcott of number 52 Bel-Air Walk, Oxnards in St. James. Police say the elderly woman, who was a passenger on board the cruise vessel Saga Sapphire, had just arrived in Barbados and had just disembarked that vessel, which was docked at the port. The woman, whose identity is being withheld until her next of kin has been notified, was pronounced dead at the scene. Well, more than 24 taxi drivers operating at the Bridgetown port now have a better chance to take cruise ship visitors on tours across the island. The Bridgetown port has entered into a pilot project with the taxi operators within the last week, giving them direct access to the cruise ship passengers. Tourism Minister Kerry Simmons says the drivers have been trained and are finally in a position to compete with the large tour operators.
We are now enabled to do a direct connection to the cruise lines for the first time ever, having their tours marketed on board of people's ships for the first time ever. And these taxi operators are now able to do a set of excursions on shore in Barbados, which represent the country's heritage, which represents the country's ecosystems and eco-experiences. So people get into a taxi, which is a 16-seater or so, and you're taken to see some of the heritage sites of the island.
Mr. Simmons says they're hoping to bring the water sports operators in line next, but has asked them to be patient.
Part of the challenge with the taxis as well as with water sports is that the discussion that must now be had is one of how we preserve certain standards, that we are able to make sure that we create a level playing field for all people who experience a taxi experience in Barbados and a water sports experience in Barbados, and that playing field is not only fair to all players, but that once you are involved in the business, there are certain standards that you are expected to abide by. And I see it as the duty of a government to help people who are falling below the expected standard to come up to the standard that we want. So that it's not just a question of saying you can't get in because you are meeting the standard. It is a question of finding out how best we can empower you to facilitate the growth of your business, that you can in fact become adequate enough to be able to get to where you want to go.
Mr. Simmons was speaking during the opening ceremony of the Genealogy Marketplace at Nesville St. Lucie today. The marketplace, which is an initiative of the Archives Department, is part of We Gathering 2020 activities. Culture Minister John King has encouraged Barbadians to come out and trace their ancestry. According to him, there is a lot that Barbadians at home and abroad can learn from a simple surname, and asks them to get on board.
From the Babs in St. Lucie to the Haynes in St. John, each and every last name reveals a little piece of a puzzle that is your life. For many years, our ancestors have been traveling across the world, and usually the piece left behind is the name, whether imported or exported. Names tell the story of Barbadian journeys to Panama and to seek out a better life and starting families.
King says there will also be the establishment of a slavery research center.
This will provide critical access to the information of the early history of Barbados during slavery. Within the center, a collection of rare books will be made available, which would help us to further understand our history. It would also be a resource for numerous persons in the region and internationally who are focused on conducting research on the Atlantic slave trade and slavery.
Well, at least 2 Anglican churches in St. Lucie have been heeding the call to give back to society during the ongoing Regathering celebrations. Under the church's national objective, Mission 2020 God's Gathering, both the St. Clement's and St. Swithin's churches have been facilitating free community legal clinics for the past 2 weeks. Priest in charge of the St. Clement's Church, Reverend Gravely Bannister, says there has been a positive response to the Saturday sessions to date. He believes the venture can continue every month.
Quite often people ask questions at the end of a church service and they do not have the resources, or they might need some assistance. I'm glad that we're able to have and to report that there's a great a level of satisfaction for those people who have attended, and a number of people have come through our doors. So we think that we will continue this program on a monthly basis.
Reverend Bannister is hopeful a similar initiative would be adopted by churches in other parishes across the island.
I hope that this program, this community-based free legal advice program put on by the Anglican churches of St. Lucie will be replicated throughout Barbados within the other Anglican churches and other churches within Barbados, so that people who are in the need of help can get the assistance, can find out where to go, and find solutions to their problems.